How childhood trauma still controls your life. Do you think you've overcome your childhood? Are you absolutely certain? Because sometimes trauma doesn't announce itself with clarity. It doesn't arrive as a vivid memory or explicit nightmare. In fact, the deepest traumas are silent, masterfully disguised. They live inside you as unconscious habits, inexplicable impulses, irrational fears, and repeating behavioral patterns that always lead to the same painful outcomes. You suffer, but you can't quite articulate why. Have you ever found yourself overreacting explosively to simple criticism? Have you experienced anxiety attacks that seem to come from nowhere? Have you pushed away people who genuinely loved you without understanding your own motives? Have you sabotaged something beautiful in your life, even though you desperately wanted it to succeed? Then let me tell you something, looking directly into your eyes as if you were sitting across from me right now. This is not drama. This is not weakness. This is not a character flaw. This is childhood trauma that has never been properly addressed, never been seen, never been healed. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the world's leading experts on trauma, makes a profound observation that changes everything. The body keeps the score. And he is absolutely right. Childhood trauma is not simply a bad memory stored in your mind. It is a complete physiological reprogramming of your entire nervous system. Your body, your brain, your perception of reality itself. Everything has been fundamentally shaped to survive an environment that once hurt you deeply. And here's what makes this even more cruel. Often you don't even remember exactly what happened. You might have fragments, impressions, feelings without context, because trauma doesn't depend on what you consciously remember. It depends on what your body felt in those moments, on how your nervous system reacted to perceived threat, and on what survival strategies you developed. If back then the world seemed unpredictable and dangerous, if your parents were emotionally distant or volatile, if you felt you had to be perfect to deserve love, your body adapted brilliantly. Your brain shifted into survival mode, creating protective mechanisms. And the devastating truth is that maybe, even today, decades later, it has never fully come out of that mode. That's why you live perpetually on alert. That's why you disconnect from your own body's signals. That's why you doubt yourself constantly, criticize yourself in silence, attract destructive relationships, or can't trust anyone fully, not even yourself. But here's a truth that can genuinely set you free. You are not broken. You were never broken. You are adapted. Brilliantly, painfully adapted to a past that still lives within you, controlling you from the shadows. And that's why today we're going to explore the 7 signs that you have never truly healed your childhood trauma. Not to label you or make you feel worse, but to show you that there is a clear explanation for your struggles. That you are not crazy or fundamentally flawed. That you are not alone in this experience. And most importantly, that there is a real path to healing, to freedom, to finally coming home to yourself. But this journey begins with awareness, with naming what has been controlling you in silence all these years. Are you ready to see what your mind has been trying to hide your whole life? Then take a deep breath and stay with me. Sign 1. Hypervigilance, when your body never stops scanning for danger. I want you to observe yourself for a moment with complete honesty. Notice your body right now, in this exact moment. Are your shoulders tense, pulled up toward your ears? Is your jaw clenched tight? Is your breathing shallow and trapped in your chest, even though nothing threatening is happening right now? This is not coincidence. This is not just stress. This is your body telling a story that your conscious mind has learned to ignore. Hypervigilance is perhaps the cruelest sign of unhealed childhood trauma, because it makes you believe that living on permanent high alert is simply who you are, that this constant tension is just your personality, that you're naturally anxious, restless, always worried about what might go wrong. But you're not naturally this way. This was learned, and worse, it was learned very early, before you had words for what was happening. When a child grows up in an unpredictable environment, emotionally unavailable parents, sudden mood swings, constant criticism, threatening silences, unexpected emotional outbursts, the body learns one fundamental lesson: relaxing is dangerous. Because when you relaxed, when you let your guard down, something painful happened. So the nervous system does exactly what it was designed to do. It adapts to ensure survival. Bessel van der Kolk explains that trauma fundamentally recalibrates the brain's alarm system. The amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for detecting threats, begins to function as if danger is permanent and imminent. The devastating problem is that this alarm system does not understand time. It cannot distinguish between past and present. For your nervous system, the past has not passed. The danger never ended. The body doesn't live in the now. It lives in the perpetual what if. That's why even in objectively safe environments, surrounded by safety, you never really feel safe. Your body is always one step ahead, constantly anticipating conflicts, rejections, losses that haven't happened yet. You unconsciously read micro-expressions on people's faces. You analyze every slight shift in tone of voice. You interpret silences as threats brewing beneath the surface. You don't rest. You watch. You monitor. You scan. And this is profoundly, devastatingly exhausting. Hypervigilance manifests in ways that many people don't even associate with trauma. Chronic insomnia because your body literally will not allow itself to shut down completely. Persistent muscle tension, especially concentrated in the neck, shoulders, and back. Frequent unexplained headaches. Digestive issues that doctors can't quite explain. A constant gnawing feeling of restlessness, as if something is perpetually out of place even when everything appears fine. You may be sitting still, but inside you are running, always running. And here's an important detail that keeps people trapped. This constant vigilance creates a powerful illusion of control. You feel that if you remain always alert, always monitoring, nothing bad will happen. You're staying one step ahead of disaster. But this is a lie that trauma tells to keep you alive, not to help you actually live well. Over time, this permanent state of defensive alertness erodes your fundamental ability to feel pleasure. Relaxing generates guilt because it feels irresponsible. Resting feels like wasting precious time. Silence becomes uncomfortable because your mind fills it with worry. Peace sounds strange, foreign, almost suspicious, because your body has learned that normal is chaos. And when there is no external chaos, it creates internal chaos to maintain the familiar state. This is where many people start desperately wondering, what is fundamentally wrong with me? Why can I never just switch off and be present? And the answer is simultaneously simple and hard to accept. There is nothing wrong with you. What exists is a nervous system stuck in survival mode, frozen in a past that has never been properly processed or released. But this constant state of internal warfare takes a severe toll. When the alert level is continuous, when your nervous system is perpetually activated, any small trigger can provoke a massive emotional explosion. The body, utterly exhausted, loses its capacity to regulate emotions effectively. And then you don't just react, you overflow. You're hijacked completely. This is where we encounter the next devastating sign. When chronic vigilance fails, extreme emotional dysregulation emerges. If this content is making sense to you, please click subscribe. Your support allows us to continue this important work. Sign 2, emotional dysregulation. When your feelings overwhelm and control you. Have you ever felt like you were being completely hijacked by your own emotions? As if suddenly something took total control and you said or did things that you later couldn't explain or justify. You scream seemingly out of nowhere. You cry uncontrollably. You lock yourself away. Or you completely shut down, disconnect, disappear from your own body as if your mind is desperately saying, I cannot handle this intensity again. If this sounds painfully familiar, you need to understand something crucial. You are not alone. This is emotional dysregulation, one of the most devastating and least understood manifestations of unresolved childhood trauma. People who have experienced childhood trauma often have a profoundly chaotic relationship with their own emotions. They don't simply feel emotions with normal intensity. They are overwhelmed by them, flooded, completely taken over. There is no middle ground, no space for reflection between the stimulus and the reaction. A sideways glance can trigger a complete emotional meltdown. A difficult conversation escalates into psychological warfare. A small criticism becomes total internal destruction. You go from 0 to 100 in seconds, bypassing all rational thought. But this is not a character flaw. This is not lack of willpower or self-control. This is neurobiology shaped by early trauma. As Bessel van der Kolk explains with clarity, trauma deactivates the part of the brain responsible for rational thinking and emotional regulation, the prefrontal cortex, and simultaneously activates the limbic system, the most primitive and instinctive part of our emotional architecture. The result? Your body reacts as if it is facing genuine life-threatening danger, even when objectively it is not. That's why during an emotional crisis, you completely lose the ability to think clearly. You cannot self-regulate in those moments because you never learned how. Children who grew up in emotionally chaotic environments, where crying was punished, anger was dangerous, or vulnerability was ridiculed and shamed, never had the opportunity to develop healthy self-regulation tools. Instead, they learned only three options: suppress completely, explode violently, or disconnect entirely. And this disconnection is equally common as explosive reactions. Instead of reacting with visible rage, some people emotionally disappear. They feel completely empty, disconnected from their own experience. They feel nothing at all, just numbness. This is dissociation, an extreme form of psychological protection where the mind separates from the body to avoid feeling unbearable pain. But this survival mechanism comes at a devastating cost. You lose not only access to the pain, but also to pleasure, to love, to genuine presence in your own life. To cope with this emotional roller coaster, with these overwhelming waves of feeling or terrifying numbness, many people resort to destructive coping strategies. Workaholism that fills every moment. Binge eating that provides temporary comfort. Substance use that dulls everything. Sex without emotional connection. Extreme isolation. Anything that brings immediate relief, even if it creates long-term destruction, because deep down you just desperately want to stop feeling so much, or start feeling something real. And all of this generates crushing guilt and shame afterward. An endless cycle of loss of control, followed by brutal self-criticism. You ask yourself again and again, why am I like this? Why can't I just be normal like everyone else seems to be? The answer is this: because you learned to survive in an environment where emotions were genuinely dangerous, where feeling was too much, where expressing needs led to punishment or abandonment. And now your body responds exactly as it learned to, not to punish you, but to protect you in the only way it knows how. But when you become accustomed to this constant emotional roller coaster, it begins to fundamentally shape all your relationships. The way you love, the way you trust, the way you attach to others, everything becomes impacted and distorted. And that's when the next sign appears clearly. Because childhood trauma doesn't only destroy your relationship with yourself, it corrupts your very ability to connect authentically with other human beings. Sign 3, insecure attachment patterns. When love feels like a threat, you desperately want love, you crave connection, you fantasize about a stable relationship where someone truly sees you, chooses you consistently, stands by your side through everything. But simultaneously, love terrifies you. Closeness feels suffocating. Distance creates unbearable pain. Intimacy feels like walking through an emotional minefield where any step might trigger an explosion. You long for deep attachment and flee from it the moment it begins to form. If this resonates deeply, understand this. It's not that you're unworthy of love. It's not bad luck. It's trauma, and it shapes from the earliest years of life exactly how you attach to people. Attachment is not merely an abstract psychological concept. It's an emotional programming that forms in the first years of life, encoded into your nervous system. According to John Bowlby's groundbreaking attachment theory, the way your primary caregivers responded to your needs with presence or absence, with validation or indifference, with consistency or unpredictability, created your internal working model of how relationships function. And if in childhood love came packaged with criticism, rejection, unpredictability, or emotional neglect, your nervous system learned a fundamental lesson. Loving is dangerous. Opening your heart leads to pain. Kolk emphasizes something crucial that most people miss. Childhood trauma is not limited to major dramatic events. Sometimes it's the small, repeated omissions that cause the deepest damage. The chronic absence of affection, the consistent invalidation of your feelings, the emotional abandonment that happened in subtle ways. All of this silently reprograms your brain and heart. How does this manifest in your adult relationships? If you developed an anxious attachment pattern, you likely experience a constant, gnawing fear of being abandoned. You compulsively analyze text messages. You interpret silences as rejection. You need constant reassurance that you're wanted and valued. Not because you're needy or clingy by nature, but because you learned viscerally that love can suddenly, without warning, disappear. And because of that terrifying possibility, you cling with desperate intensity, even when that very clinging pushes away the people you're trying to hold close. If your pattern is avoidant, you likely sabotage intimacy without even realizing you're doing it. When someone gets too close emotionally, you feel profound discomfort. You disbelieve in love's permanence. You minimize your own feelings and others. You create distance through various strategies. Not because you're cold or incapable of feeling, but because for you, throughout your formative years, vulnerability consistently meant pain. You learned that depending on someone is opening yourself to inevitable hurt. So you protect yourself by closing off completely. And there's also disorganized attachment, perhaps the most devastating pattern of all. It's a chaotic, confusing mix of desperate desire and paralyzing fear existing simultaneously. You seek love intensely while simultaneously distrusting it completely. You want closeness but freeze when it actually happens. Your relationships become emotional roller coasters, intense, painful, confusing, unpredictable. And tragically, you often end up relating to people who replicate exactly the pattern that once hurt you. Emotionally unavailable partners, unstable relationships, even abusive dynamics. Why? Because they feel familiar. And that's what trauma does with devastating efficiency. It creates an emotional script, a blueprint. And if you don't consciously rewrite it, you end up reliving the same painful roles and dynamics, just with different actors playing the parts. The cruelest part of all this? You start to genuinely believe that the problem is fundamentally you, that you don't know how to love properly, that you weren't meant to be loved, when in reality all of this is simply a reflection of a body and psyche that were trained early to survive dangerous, painful connections, not to thrive in healthy ones. But this dynamic doesn't only affect your romantic relationships. It profoundly affects how you see yourself, how you treat yourself internally, how you talk to yourself when no one else is listening. And that's where the next devastating symptom of unhealed childhood trauma is born. Brutal self-criticism and toxic shame that colors everything. Sign 4. Toxic shame and relentless self-criticism, the prison you built inside. You look in the mirror and see a mistake. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you achieve externally, the voice is always there, relentless and cruel, endlessly repeating, "You are not enough. You will never be enough." You feel shame, but not for something specific you did wrong. Rather, you feel shame for who you are at your core, as if your mere existence were a burden to others, as if you were born with some factory defect that can never be fixed. This is not simply low self-esteem. This is toxic shame, an emotional poison that seeps into every corner of your life, contaminating everything. And the most tragic part? It almost always originates in childhood, in those early formative years. The child who grows up in an environment where they are constantly criticized, ignored, or forced to be perfect to earn basic love learns a devastating, life-altering lesson. I am the problem. Not that something is wrong with their behavior that can be corrected, but that they themselves, at their essence, are wrong. They are the defect. And this belief becomes the distorted lens through which absolutely everything is interpreted and filtered for the rest of their life. Bessel van der Kolk discusses how trauma disrupts the brain's natural ability to integrate a coherent, stable narrative of oneself. Without this integrated narrative, you don't build a solid identity. You only carry fragments, scattered pieces of pain, guilt, confusion, and worthlessness that never quite form a complete picture. This is how the inner critic is born. That harsh voice, shaped by years of external invalidation, carrying the actual words of parents, teachers, or authority figures, and transforming them into absolute, unquestionable truths. You're stupid. You always mess everything up. No one will ever love you this way. You're too difficult, too much, too sensitive. You have to earn love. It's not given freely. And even as an adult, even with degrees and accomplishments, a career, friends, relationships, the voice continues its relentless assault because it's not rational or logical. It's somatic, embodied. It's deeply rooted in your nervous system. And the more desperately you try to compensate for this core pain with perfectionism, productivity, or people-pleasing, the further you drift from your authentic self. Nothing is ever enough. You are never enough. No achievement quiets the voice for long. This toxic shame also prevents you from receiving genuine love from others. Because deep down, You believe with absolute conviction that you don't deserve it. When someone compliments you sincerely, you deflect or minimize. When you receive affection, you become suspicious of their motives. When you succeed at something, you attribute it to luck rather than your abilities. Because accepting love, accepting recognition, accepting success requires you to see yourself as worthy. And for someone who was taught from their earliest years that their value depended entirely on performance, obedience, or remaining invisible, worthiness feels impossible. And so you sabotage yourself, not only in relationships, but in opportunities, projects, creative endeavors, dreams. Every time something genuinely good approaches, your mind triggers the alarm. Be careful, this is not for you. You don't deserve this. It will be taken away. And because trauma taught you to trust that cruel voice above all others, you retreat, you pull back, you ensure the prophecy fulfills itself. The most insidious part is that this cycle of self-criticism and shame feeds on itself with perfect efficiency. You fail because you sabotage yourself. Then you hate yourself for failing. Then you try to fix everything with even more control, more perfectionism, more impossible demands, until you break completely under the weight. And when you break, all you feel is more shame for breaking, for being weak, for not being strong enough. But there is a way out of this prison, and it doesn't start by trying to forcefully change your thoughts or simply thinking more positively. It starts by reconnecting with something you lost along the way, your body. Because trauma is not only stored in your mind, it's hidden, encoded in the body you learn to abandon. If what you're hearing resonates deeply, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day practical path to apply them. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Sign 5. Disconnection from the body. Living from the neck up. You live almost entirely in your mind. You think constantly, obsessively. You analyze everything to death. You get lost in endless internal dialogues, recreating past conversations, rehearsing confrontations that may never actually happen. You are always mentally on, but simultaneously disconnected. Disconnected from yourself, from your body, from your most basic physical sensations. And when someone asks how you feel, you respond with what you think, not what you actually feel in your body. This disconnection from your body is not accidental. It's not a personality quirk. It's protection, a survival mechanism. For many people who experience childhood trauma, especially chronic emotional trauma or unprocessed somatic experiences such as abuse, neglect, or unpredictable threatening environments, the body became dangerous territory. Your body became the place where pain resides, where abandonment is recorded and stored, where tension never ceases. And when the body becomes synonymous with suffering, with threat, the mind attempts to escape it, to dissociate from it, to silence all its signals. You learn unconsciously to live from the neck up, as if your thoughts were the last safe refuge, the only place you can exist without pain. But as Bessel van der Kolk emphasizes repeatedly, trauma is stored in the body, not primarily in thoughts. It doesn't disappear with logical explanations or rational understanding. It doesn't resolve through intellectual insight alone. It lives in the automatic physical reactions, in the chronically tense muscles, in the perpetually short breath, in the knotted stomach, in the tight chest for no apparent reason. It manifests in symptoms that conventional doctors cannot explain. Chronic pain with no clear cause. Exhausting fatigue that rest doesn't relieve. Persistent digestive issues. Migraines. Insomnia. All of this can be the body desperately trying to express what your conscious mind never knew how to process. This disconnection also profoundly affects your capacity to feel pleasure. And I'm not only talking about sexual pleasure, though that's often affected. I mean joy, enthusiasm, tranquility, peace, all the embodied emotions that require body and mind to be in presence together. When you live dissociated from your body, these moments of genuine pleasure become rare or even impossible to access. You feel perpetually that something is missing, but you can't identify what. As if there were an invisible film separating you from actually experiencing life, from being fully here. And here lies the painful irony. To heal trauma, you need to journey through exactly the territory you learn to avoid at all costs, the body itself. That's why there's so much discussion today about somatic therapies, trauma-informed yoga, breathwork, authentic movement, conscious touch. None of this is mysticism or New Age fantasy. It's applied neuroscience. Van der Kolk demonstrates clearly how the body can become the portal to healing when it's included in the therapeutic process. Because while the conscious mind relives and rethinks, the body reenacts and stores. And only the body can ultimately release what it has been holding. But to begin trusting your body again, you first need to regain basic trust in yourself. And that is another profound challenge for those carrying deep wounds from childhood. Because when you learn from very young that your perceptions weren't valid, that your emotions were always too much, that your decisions were consistently wrong, you also learn to fundamentally doubt yourself. And that's why the next sign may be quietly paralyzing you today, even without your conscious awareness. Sign 6. Difficulty trusting yourself. When your inner compass is broken. Have you ever felt that you genuinely can't trust your own decisions? That no matter how much you analyze, reflect endlessly, and think through every possible scenario, you still remain frozen in indecision? You ask everyone for advice. You consult videos, books, experts, friends, anyone who might tell you what to do. But in the end, you remain paralyzed because deep down, you don't believe in yourself. You don't trust your own judgment. This difficulty trusting yourself is not simple shyness or normal insecurity. It's a deep wound with roots extending back to when having your own voice was actually dangerous, when expressing an opinion meant being corrected or dismissed, when showing an emotion meant being ridiculed, when trying to decide something independently, someone would immediately tell you don't know what you're doing. This kind of repeated invalidation throughout childhood slowly but completely undermines your connection to your own intuition. You stop listening to your body's natural signals. You stop trusting your instinctive responses. You start believing that everything you feel is an exaggeration, that everything you think is probably wrong. Over time, you internalize a devastating belief. You need validation from someone outside yourself to make any move, any decision. You become dependent on others' approval. You postpone important life decisions endlessly, waiting for the mythical right moment. You ignore obvious red flags in relationships or situations because you've learned to systematically distrust your own perceptions. And when things inevitably go wrong, instead of offering yourself compassion, you punish yourself brutally. I knew I shouldn't have trusted myself. I knew I'd mess it up. This is how childhood trauma creates a vicious cycle of self-abandonment. And this cycle also manifests in compulsive, self-destructive behaviors. Because when you don't trust yourself, when you don't believe your own judgment, you start acting on pure impulse instead. You react without thinking. You sabotage without realizing. You get involved with people you know aren't good for you. You refuse opportunities that would actually benefit you. You make decisions that deep down you know will cause pain. But you do it anyway, driven by forces you don't understand. Because no matter how irrational it seems from the outside, repeating what is familiar feels safer than venturing into the unknown, even when the familiar is painful. This broken internal compass, this inability to trust your own perceptions and decisions, keeps you trapped in patterns you consciously want to escape. And it connects directly to the final sign we need to address. Sign 7, compulsive repetition of painful patterns, recreating what hurt you. This is perhaps the most confusing and frustrating sign of all. You know rationally what's bad for you. You can clearly articulate what you should avoid. Yet somehow, you keep finding yourself in the same destructive situations, the same toxic relationships, the same self-sabotaging behaviors. You swear you'll never repeat certain mistakes, yet you do, again and again. Different circumstances, different people, but the same underlying pattern, the same painful outcome. This is not stupidity. This is not moral failure. This is trauma's most insidious mechanism, compulsive repetition. Your unconscious mind, shaped by early experiences, keeps recreating familiar scenarios in a desperate attempt to finally master them, to finally get it right, to finally earn the love or safety you needed as a child. But it never works, because you're trying to heal old wounds with new people who cannot possibly heal them. You're trying to get from others what you needed from your parents but never received. And so the cycle continues, leaving you feeling more broken, more hopeless, more convinced that you're fundamentally damaged beyond repair. But you're not damaged. You're trapped in a pattern created long ago, when you were too young to understand what was happening. And the beautiful truth is this: patterns can be broken. Wounds can heal. Your nervous system can learn safety. Your body can release what it's been holding. but it requires doing what feels most frightening, turning toward the pain instead of away from it, reconnecting with your body instead of living only in your mind, trusting yourself again slowly, gently, and most importantly, seeking help from those who understand trauma, who can guide you back to yourself. You are not broken. You are not too damaged. You are not beyond healing. You are carrying wounds that make perfect sense given what you experienced. And with the right support, with patience, with compassion for yourself, you can finally come home to the person you were always meant to be. The journey is not easy, but you've already survived the hardest part. Now it's time to move beyond mere survival and learn to actually live.